presidency, it was a big part of my presidency to bring this country back together because it was still torn apart. The war had only been gone for 15 years, but the North and South were still separate. And by economy and by ideology. And also the man, the African-American man who spoke of a president African-American. It was my responsibility to help bring them the right to vote. And during my presidency, I would give the African-American the right to vote, which was a big task and it was a very difficult one. But I'm very proud for that opportunity, for what I helped do for those people who had struggled so long in this country. And Mr. Lincoln had given of himself and his life to free. And I thank him for that. And his son, yes, Robert Todd Lincoln, he is my Secretary of War. I do believe you may call it Secretary of Defense, something of this, yes. But he was my Secretary of War, and very tall fellow, just as yourself, very strong, strapping fellow. And but he always could tell a good joke. Always could tell a good joke. And
the chip off the old block, sir.
yes, sir, I do say so, sir. And but one other thing is, it was very difficult. You see, after the Civil War, this country had been torn apart economically and socially. And we had forgotten about the rest of the world. And I decided that I would bring the rest of the world back to the United States. See, the economy of the world had forgotten about us because we were torn apart and we were bleeding. We were bleeding economically, we were bleeding socially, we were bleeding spiritually. And we needed to be brought back together. And also, I was one of the first presidents, you see, when I ran for president, I wasn't planning on doing it. You see, a good friend of mine asked me to speak at the Republican convention in his behalf. And as people were listening to me speak, they thought, well, this man, he would be better suited for president. I had no idea that I would plan to run for president. You see, I was already running for Congress, and I was also running for a seat in the Senate. And it turned out that I run for a seat in Congress, Senate, and then I was also running for the presidency. I was running for 3 different seats at the same time. Yes, it was quite a big responsibility. But when the presidency came along, I thought that might be a better job to take at the time. But I'd like to thank you for listening to me. You've been very kind. And I'd like to turn it over to our 26th president. Very outspoken fellow, Mr. Theodore Roosevelt, sir.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
I am delighted to be here today. You know, there is an old African adage that says to speak softly and carry a big stick and you will go far. But while you keep your eyes to the stars, best to keep your feet to the ground. I was born in New York City in 1858, and unfortunately my earliest memories were those of being a sickly and ill child. I suffered from the bad effects of asthma, and I remember those terrible nights when I had problems breathing, and my father had to carry me upstairs. I recall when I was about 13, I got into a fight with some fellows my age, and I could barely hold myself with them. And I told my father about this, and he said, Theodore, while you build up your mind, you must also build up your body. So he built me a gymnasium where I exercised, and I overcame the ill effects of asthma. And that has led me to a philosophy that I believe that every American should follow. That is the philosophy of the strenuous life. Not the gray matter area where one is not afraid to take a chance, but to be in the arena, to take the chances, and to meet those challenges head on. That is the type of life I believe that I have lived, and I believe that every American shall live. And I also dedicated myself to public service. I was the youngest member elected to the New York State Assembly. Then I became a rancher in the Dakota Territories. I remarried, returned to New York, where I served I ran as an unsuccessful candidate for mayor of New York. I served on the United States Civil Service Commission. I was the head of the Police Commission Commissioners Board in New York City. And then I was appointed the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And when war came with Spain, my place was not at a desk, but out in the field. So I volunteered my services for the United States Army. I was commissioned as eventually a colonel in the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, which you know as the Rough Riders. I led my men up Kettle Hill and we captured the Spanish fort on San Juan Hill. I returned to New York where I was nominated and elected governor of New York. And then in 1900, I was nominated to run for vice president with President McKinley. Yes, I think you may know him, Mr. Garfield. I believe you served in the war together.
Yes, we did.
And in Congress, too.
Yes, I believe he helped handle my presidential.
Yes, he did.
Yes.
Oh, yes, we have a lot in common. We'll talk about that in a little while. And then I was elected and, of course, inaugurated as vice president, and then fate stepped in. The sad fate that, unfortunately, Mr. Garfield and Mr. Lincoln met, Mr. McKinley met. He was assassinated, and at the age of 42, I became the 26th and youngest president of the United States. And I believe that the presidency should be the great bully pulpit to fight the fundamental fight for democracy. I believe in a square deal for every American, to see that the rules change, that there is equality of opportunity for all Americans. And I sought to see that the government take an active role in our life. Under my administration, we successfully negotiated an end to a coal strike in 1902. It was coming in on the side of the American people. I made conservation a cornerstone of American domestic policy. We passed the Pure Food and Drug Act to see that it is more than customer beware, but the consumer be protected. I also saw to it the United States play an active role in world affairs, because as a result for mediating and ending the Russo-Japanese War, I became the first American and first American president to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Yes, I did it for accomplishing something. Yes, thank you. Because I believe the United States should play an active role in world affairs. And the cornerstone of that, the capstone of that, was our acquiring the isthmus, the canal zone across the Isthmus of Panama. I tried to negotiate with those Columbia jackrabbits, but I had no more luck negotiating with them than I could nailing jelly to a wall. And while the Congress debated the canal treaty, let them, because the building of the canal goes on. But I do want to say this about being president. I do want to say this about my life, that when I die, death will have to take me when I am asleep, because if I am awake, there definitely will be a struggle. I want to say this: nobody enjoyed being president as much as I did. Thank you.
I'm concerned about this assassination. Actually, I feel fine.
You know, after all, but President Roosevelt, you mentioned something about carrying a big stick.
Yes.
I have listened to all those nitwits in Congress for 4 years. And each and every one, I have one good saying. It's better to look foolish and remain silent than open your mouth and leave no doubt whatsoever. It seems they cannot get things right.
Oh, absolutely.
No, I
Absolutely.
cannot. They do not agree with each other whatsoever.
But then perhaps having the Civil War in my hands had a lot more to do with it than you gentlemen. But you have had your problems all through as well, as we both all know.
Oh, yes.
Yes, indeed. So,
Mr. Roosevelt, I mean, how do you know much about us?
Well, actually, we have a lot in common.
Really?
Yes, Mr. Lincoln, when I was a child in New York City, your funeral procession passed by our home.
well, I hope you had a good feeling about that.
Well, it was a sad day, but it was a very important day. And Mr. Garfield, you know, the first presidential election I voted for you.
Well, thank you, sir.
Yes,
Thank
and
you, sir.
Garfield, yes. And you have a son, James Garfield?
Yes, I do. James, yes.
Yes, well, he served in my cabinet as the Secretary of Interior.
Yeah, he did.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, well, I'll have to talk to him about that.